Our repertoire and the way we use it is hugely important in our churches. Many of us who lead worship love to introduce new songs. I think that singing new songs is important, but it's also vital to select them well and to use them in refreshing a base of songs which is well known. The aim of singing in worship is almost always participation rather than performance. We want people not merely to join in with songs, but to adopt them, to own them, to use them as a vehicle for expressing their worship. This is often much easier with songs which are known. It's also best enabled by using songs which the vast majority of people find singable. In this session, we're going to look at how we can strike the right balance between new and old, together with selecting songs that our congregations can really sing. Let's think first about how to select songs your congregation can sing. One of the major complaints I hear as I visit different churches and talk to people about worship is that our songs are often too high. Now, you might be one of the lucky ones who's able to sing modern worship songs in the keys in which they were recorded. Unfortunately, that puts you squarely in the minority. Many of the songs written and recorded over the last few years have been written or recorded by male tenors, men with a pretty high range. Because of this, they tend to be quite high. Now, that's particularly understandable when you consider that the male voice sounds most powerful at the top of its range. It's natural that these singers and songwriters would want to record in the key that's best for their voice. Sadly, it's not often the best key for a congregation. Over the years I've been leading worship, a key priority for me has been enabling everyone to sing. As I've done this, I've found that the key and range of songs is of particular importance. I've come to the conclusion that there is a widely shared congregational range which, if we work within it, helps to enable the largest number of people to sing. For some worship leaders, this will mean a compromise on where their voice sounds best. Personally, I think that's an appropriate sacrifice to enable the church to sing and become more involved in our sung worship. So the range I've found that works goes from a bottom A to a top D. For women, it's the A below middle C and the D above. For men, it's the octave below that. The easiest way to find these notes on your guitar is using the A string and going right from the open string, so no frets, up to fret 17. Most of the time, if we keep the range of a song within this span, our congregations will be able to sing it. Having said that, the complete range isn't the whole story. Within this, the average man and woman will find the real power in their voice in different places. Men tend to be able to open up and belt more at the top of their range. For untrained voices in the congregation, that's likely to be around the A above middle C to high D, although we sing it an octave below. The most powerful part of the range for women is likely to be in the middle of their range, so between E and A or B. Now, as you can see, the crossover between the two is quite small. Just a couple of notes in here. That makes it hard when we're picking songs. Typically, men will find it harder than women to sing out in a low range, whilst women might find it hard to sing loudly at the top of their range. We tried this out in workshops and seminars, and it seems to work every time. It means that, even for songs within the overall range, we sometimes need to adjust the key in order to compromise between the strongest part of the male and female voices. For example, men might be most comfortable singing something like 10,000 Reasons in the key of F or even G where it was originally written, where women will typically prefer it in D. I found that the best compromise is often to sing it in E, which produces the most comfortable overall result. We might also change the key slightly whilst staying within the range, depending on who's leading. But for me, this is secondary to considering the congregation. One thing that impacts our choice of keys is the trend for using octave leaps within songs, beginning at a low octave and then jumping up when the dynamic rises. This often makes it impossible to stay within a congregational range both before and after the leap. The octave jump certainly adds excitement to an arrangement, but this can come at the expense of singability. Cornerstone is a good example. The original recording is in the key of C. It begins on a middle C, but after the leap, the top note is a high G. And that's way too high for the normal range of a congregation. If we were to try to bring that note back within the singable range, it would mean that the bottom note, the starting note, is a low G. Again, that's outside our congregational range. Singing at this pitch is likely to be impossible for many, and men might find it hard to pitch. The obvious solution here is to dispense with the leap and use a key somewhere in the middle. D, E and F could all work, but it really puts a premium on using good dynamics to lift the song. Even so, my advice would always be to make the choice which is best for the congregation. And in this case, and most often, that's to avoid the jumps. There are some songs which, even without octave leaps, have a range which is either nearly or actually too wide to fit a congregation. Bethel's Forever is an example of a song which only just squeaks in if you play it in the key of A. Here the verse is very low, beginning on a bottom A, while the chorus is sustained around the top D. Now this is singable by a congregation, but I'd always be careful not to pick it too early in a service before voices have warmed up. There may be some songs that you choose not to sing because the range is so wide. That's a perfectly valid choice. So with considerations about range in mind, let's move on to picking new songs. Churches will vary in their ability to learn and absorb new songs. It may be that your church longs for new songs, but many congregations I come across suddenly express themselves as soon as they hear an old favourite. I think that keeping a balance between known and new songs is another important factor in helping people to sing. At my church, we've taken the decision not to introduce more than one song in any month. Over a year, we're likely to introduce about 10 new songs. We keep the number low so that we can repeat them in the weeks after they've first been picked, so that they become known more quickly. As a general rule, we'll try to sing a song at least 3 times during the first 5 or 6 weeks, and then fairly regularly afterwards. Now we have to coordinate between worship leaders to enable this, but we found that it really helps the congregation to become comfortable with those new songs. I'd suggest that it's good to have a rough number of new songs you're looking to introduce, and then to agree these so that all leaders or bands can work together and help them become a firm part of the repertoire. Whilst we're thinking about repertoire, there are 2 more areas which are worth considering. First is that there's a limited number of songs a congregation can know really well. If you have too many songs to pick from, it's likely that there won't be enough repetition for people to really know the songs well. If you have too few on your list, or if you repeat your favourites too often, it can be easy to wear songs out and to become bored or over-familiar with them. The number of songs on your list will vary according to how many are picked each week. For example, if you pick 8 songs each week, a list of 60 would mean that you sing each song on average roughly once every 2 months. That's a fairly healthy level of repetition. A list of 100 might enable you to pick some songs more than others, but if the repertoire grows much larger, it will be difficult for a congregation to get to know everything. I always advocate coming up with a core list and reviewing it at least annually to include new songs, to rest old songs, and to remove songs you don't sing anymore. This kind of list also makes it much easier for a wider group of people to take part in song selection. With a core list, You may also have some guidelines about the balance of repertoire you use each week. For some congregations, it's important to ensure that hymns are sung regularly in order to serve them. Or you may want to make sure that a new song is repeated. This kind of arrangement always needs to be communicated to the people picking the songs and those leading them. As different churches will have varying needs at this point, we've got a choice of questions for you. Do pick one or two you think will be most helpful in your context. So you could choose to look through the songs you've used recently. How many of them stack up in terms of congregational range? And ask yourself, is there anything that you need to do to address this? Or you could try to agree how many new songs you think you should introduce. How often ought you to sing them? And how are they going to be taught? You might want to consider if there are any guidelines you should have in place with regard to song selection. Or you could listen to possible new songs together and identify those that you might want to introduce. Finally, you could begin to develop a repertoire list to focus your song selection.